Is it an invasion? The president says it is. Most of America says it is. But some people say it isn't. Well, what's the truth? Coming up next on Deceptions of the Ages News. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Deceptions of the Ages News. I want to tell you I apologize for my week-long absence, but I was down at the world-famous ECETI Ranch watching UFOs. Unbelievable stuff. Check that out on my Encounters USA channel. So today we're going to talk about, is it an invasion or isn't it? But first, I want to ask you guys, please, if you haven't yet, hit that subscribe button if you like this content. And check out my book, Deceptions of the Ages, Mormons, Freemasons, and Extraterrestrials, if you want to know more about what's going on today. So, if we are going to talk about the word invasion, we need to know what invasion actually is. So we can look at the dictionary and we can look at history to see that there are different kinds of invasions. The first invasion that we are all familiar with is the kind of invasion that is a military style invasion. Now, in this style of invasion, you have an armed force that moves into the territory of an enemy or a country that it wants to take over, and it basically annihilates any opposition and subjugates its citizens. So they take over the political system, they take over the power, etc., etc. So there's another style of invasion, and that is one that is actually more common, and that is where a movement of peoples just happens to, over time, gradually overwhelm a country or a territory. This happened a lot back in ancient Rome. It happened during the time of Greece, and of course it is happening today. Now, a lot of people say that the immigration of Europeans to the American continent was an invasion. Well, by all definitions, it absolutely was, except for the fact that it was not really an invasion. Not an invasion, you say? How could that be? Well, the fact of the matter is the immigration of Europeans to the American continent occurred over a long period of time and occurred with the consent of the people who are living here. Now, what do I mean by occurred with the consent of the people who are living here? Well, the fact of the matter is, the reason that the European colonists were so successful from the time that Cortez first arrived in the Caribbean and onto mainland Mexico was that there were intertribal rivalries that had gone on for sometimes hundreds of years that put these tribes at war with each other. So when the Europeans came, the natives saw the Europeans as somebody who could help them against their enemies. Now, the Europeans were very, very quick to exploit this. But this is a very key point. Along with the devastation that occurred because of disease, the intertribal warfare between different tribes really allowed the European colonists to get a foothold in the Americas. That's very important. Now, another thing that I want most Americans to understand, or people that are listening to this, I've spent a lot of time overseas, and when I hear people overseas talking about what they know about American history, all they seem to know is that, oh, well, these white people came and stole land from the Native Americans, which is absolutely, I mean, in some cases, yes, it is true, but in all cases, it occurred because the Native Americans did not unite against this common enemy, and they were easily conquered. Now, there's another aspect of this that people also ignore because and overlook because they're just not that adept at history. But the other factor in this, along with disease and this intertribal warfare, was technology. The people from Europe brought technology the natives wanted, and they felt that the trade off was justified because the technology that they were acquiring was better than the way it was before. And that continued on and on. And now, of course, the whites who came in also exploited this dependence on their technology by getting them dependent on the technology, and then once they're addicted to it, then they start to make their demands for concessions of land. So, does that sound familiar? Now, the last thing I want to reiterate here so that you understand is the idea of a border. The Native Americans only thought that the border, well, they didn't understand a border, they understood hunting grounds, areas that they needed to survive and subsist in, and those were borders. But as far as letting people into the country and where they were coming from, they didn't really have a good idea of where these Europeans were coming from or how many would come. So in the end, because they did practice open borders, because they didn't understand the border, they could never stop this wave of people coming in because they never united to do it. Now, the second kind of invasion is, of course, the most popular kind of invasion, and that is the one by military force. And we can just look at the Germans in World War I or World War II, or we can look at the conflict that happened in Texas, in which the United States acquired Texas, California, Oregon, and Washington. But when you talk about the Mexican-American War, what you had was a bunch of settlers that went into Texas that wanted to start, not wanted to be part of America, but wanted to start their own country. And they had, because Texas and under General Santa Anna tried to basically force them into slavery under the Mexican rule, well, they rebelled and they got help from the United States Army, and the rest is history. But that all started with a conflict. It started with a conflict. So now we're getting to this idea that, oh, well, what is happening here is with this all of this massive illegal immigration, and people are saying it's not an invasion. Well, let's look at that a little bit more closely. Now, first of all, you have to understand this is not about race. The Germans conquered all of Europe. They're all the same race. It's not about race. What is about? It is about culture. It is about people having a way of life, a language, a way of doing things, a way of being honest and dealing with each other that is not respected by an outside, force, whatever. We've spent hundreds of years as Europeans trying to figure out government, trying to figure out our relationship with each other, trying to figure out our relationship with our religions and our gods. And then suddenly everything is just thrown out the window because in the 1990s they started telling us that we are going to allow an invasion of 1 million people every year, plus all their relatives. 1 million people every year. Now, why did they do that? Do you remember what I said about the Native Americans? And well, there were some of them that hated the other ones, and they would make deals with anybody in order to get back at the other ones. So we saw that in the last administration. We saw an administration that hated the home country. They were going to sell us out. They're going to sell all of our weapons making material to Russia, or 20%. They tried to, well, we'll get into the coup in a second, but in the last administration, we saw an example of what happened with the Native Americans. You had a guy and a group of people that were willing to sell out their fellow natives to these invaders. Okay, now, who are these invaders? Well, basically, it's not about race or culture or anything in this case. It's about people with money. These people all represent corporations, and the corporations want cheap labor, they want strife, and they want hatred and intolerance in our country, and they know the only way to do that is to dump a whole bunch of different cultures on the American people that don't know anything about what's going on. And suddenly, bam, you got everybody's here. So that was one element of the native invasion where they suffered, because they had people that would turn on them, just as we have the Obama administration and the Clinton administration and the Bush administration that opened up these borders and did not try to enforce anything. So suddenly you have the same thing that the Native Americans. Suddenly you have millions of people here. And what are you gonna do? Now, the next thing that happens in any invasion is that the invaders have to take over the land, they have to take over the power, and they have to take over the political system. That means that when I say political system, these are the people who get to collect the taxes and decide where the money goes. Now, as you can see, all up and down the West Coast, these traders that have allowed all of these people into our country and into these states, like where I live, we don't have, where I live, yet if you go to the store, you can't find an American. So we have lots of different cultures here. Nobody wants to be an American. You can't even talk about Donald Trump, or you can't talk about being a Republican. And I ran as a Republican last summer against one of these Democratic candidates that's allowing all this invasion in, because I'm not the kind of guy who would sell out my own country and my own neighbors for a buck. But the bottom line is these rich people, and this is what it is, these rich people, these liberals, they want this cheap labor, and they want, first of all, they want these votes that these illegals and these invaders will give them, because, you know, the other people are saying, no, 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 we can't have this invasion, we need to keep our country. These invaders, the first thing that they do when they come in is they want to change the language. The first thing you would do if you were a wolf going into a sheep's pen is you would want to kill any sheep that made an alarm that there are wolves in the pen. And it's the same thing in an invasion. The Nazis had their Joseph Goebbels, and we have our CNN. The Nazis had the Gestapo, and we have the FBI. So these people are all engineered, and you look at Google, and these are monitoring, and these are like the KGB, and all of these people, and the head of Google, another invader, right? So they're all here to get us, right? Just like, you know, I'm not going to say just like the Native Americans, because a lot of Americans really respect our native culture. But these people coming here don't respect our native culture, and they certainly don't respect us. So what they do is they have a war on words. And so here are some of the words that you can't use, or you will have these people coming after you. You can't say illegal immigrant, right? You have to say immigrant. Well, immigrant means that, oh, you came here legally, yada, yada, yada. No, it is that you are an illegal immigrant because you crossed the border illegally. You can't, if there is a attack. Now just think of it, a wolf attacks a sheep. Well, the first thing the other wolves are going to do is say, don't look at this dead sheep. So when there is an attack by a Muslim terrorist, when there is an attack on people who are conservatives by like these Antifa people, that doesn't really make it into the media. What does make it into the media is any time that the home people, remember the Native Americans, some of them like Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse and Hiawatha and Tecumseh, they all fought back. Well, there are Americans like me and you that will fight back, but we are getting identified now, and they are putting our names on papers and doing whatever they're doing, because that is what the invaders do. They do it all throughout history. So you have to understand all this, and you have to understand this didn't happen here for the first time. It's happened before. It happened with the Nazis, and the people who are promulgating this invasion are these liberals who know that the American people are working and trying to make money and trying to raise families, and they're going to bring all these people in here to make sure you don't make enough money, and they're going to bring in all these people in here to threaten you, to bring rape and crime and gangs and everything that they brought in here. Now, this is not about racism or anything like that. Latin people are awesome, very wonderful people, but they come from a culture. If you look at Mexico, if you look at Guatemala, etc., you have to ask yourself, is that the system we want? Because they're not going to come here and say, oh, we're wonderful Americans now. They're just going to bring the same system of crime, lack of education. They don't speak our language, so how are they possibly going to fit in? So the question is the United States really under an invasion, or is it not? And the question is something that you have to answer for yourself, and how you act about that is upon your own conscience. But I ran in the 2018 Senate race, and I said that we need to stop immigration completely. It is the biggest threat to our national security, and I still say that. So I'm not mincing any words about that, and if you will look at my agenda, you will see that everything that I talked about is now being implemented. So the last thing I want to say is that the last thing that these people do, these Nazis, the invaders, the Americans did it to the natives, etc., etc. The Nazis did it to the Russians and the Jews. They take the guns, okay? So as soon as these people come in and they start talking about, oh, we're not invaders, we want the guns, we're all running for office now, we are going to collect welfare, we are going to tax your government, and we're going to vote illegally. Where in the last election, millions voted illegally. So I ask you, and you have to answer for yourself, is it an invasion or is it not? It's up to you to decide, and it's up to you to act according to your conscience. This is Deceptions of the Ages News, and we'll see you next time.